Next, I want to explore a little bit with grid. How do I fit grid into this thing as well? So what I'm going to do is, and why does it do it right there? Maybe I just give it a pixel width. I think I like that better. Yeah, that's a little bit better. I think that percentage thing was throwing stuff off. Again, there isn't like I'm explaining this, there isn't a right or wrong way to do this. The right or wrong is, does it make sense when you see the thing in a smaller or more narrow browser? And that's the exercise is can we like get in here and like play around with Flex, play around with grid. Okay, so the next thing is grid. So here's this one, and then I'm going to come back and go over to my grid, my grid lesson or thing here. And so here's a display grid. Now, I have read this, and because I have read this, my discovery is that the first way that they describe how to create a grid is not the way that I like or the way that's most intuitive to me. And I find grid to be not very intuitive. So it's like grid, this is kind of like, this is complicated stuff. And so if it didn't like immediately snap to you that, oh my gosh, this is so intuitive, you're not alone. And if it did, then you are a special kind of mind, and we're so glad to have you with us. All right, so anywho, this is kind of the thing that makes sense to me. And so what you're doing is you're defining you're identifying the piece of code in your code. So in my case, I might have header in this space. In this thing, I might have main and then footer, and I may not use this last one, right? And then grid area header. So you're identifying the thing, and then you're giving it a name that Flex is that grid is gonna use. And then down here in the container, I have display grid, grid template columns. This gives me the size of the columns, rows, auto sizes it. And then the grid template area allows me to write out these different things, and then that is how it's structured in the CSS. So let's take a look at that in our example. So I'm going to come back here, and so what I'm going to do is up here in the body, I'm going to have the body be the grid container, as opposed to something like I'm in the body and I'm going to add a div with an ID of grid, right? So copy that, bring that to the end of the thing, right? And then add my div there. So that is another way to do that. And there may be some advantages to doing it that way. There's the body is maybe not always the best thing to be the grid container or to be the thing that you're kind of working with. It's kind of nice to have the next level up that you can refer to later on. But with something this simple, I think that the body is perfectly legitimate. And in most cases, the body is just fine to use for that. So I'm going to use the body for the grid container. So display grid. All right. And then the next thing that I want to do is do this thing, right? So I'm like taking this little bit and then I'm applying it to my code. And so I'm going to come back, and then so my display is grid, my grid template area, grid template columns, 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%. That equals 100%. And make sure you got a semicolon rather than a colon. And then just like our example, here, can I push that over maybe? All right, here's our grid template rows auto. I'm going to take that exactly the way it is, pop that right there. And then my grid template areas, I'm not going to do exactly this, but I'm going to take that and do it like this. And then I want to make sure that this stuff is all nice and neat. So header is going to work. My main is going to work. What this little dot means is that you have an empty space, but I'm not going to do that empty space. I'm just going to do main again, and then footer. All right, great. All right, so that's great, but it's not going to work yet. So if I come over here and do this, oh man, look how messed up it got, right? Everything is screwed up. What I have to do is put in the definition of those areas. And let's see, where did I do that? Okay, so oops, here we've got this thing. So I'm going to grab this and copy it. And then I'll probably do this before here, just for the sake of keeping everything organized. So what I'm going to do with here is I'm selecting this, and then I'm using control, there's a command, and then the square bracket. And what that does is take my block and you know, bring it in. So I save this and I come back and I refresh, and there's nothing changed here. It's still messed up, right? So, and the reason is that this needs to correspond to these things that are in the thing, right? So in the text. So I need something for the header. I need to identify the main, and I need to identify the footer, right? Header, main, footer. So I have to, it seems like it's redundant, but I'm doing two different things here. For the header, I'm attaching this rule to this element, but then I'm giving it a name of header so that this thing is connected to this area. I know that that might seem confusing, but like if I wanted to do like item A, I have a class name, and then I could do my item A here as opposed to header, right? And then that would work. But I don't want to add a class name if I already have the element identified. There's only one header, and so I don't need to create another class name. So I'm just going to put the header there. And at the risk of being redundant there and confusing, hopefully I cleared that up just then. Okay, so so there's the header, and then here is the main, and then I'm taking this sidebar thing out. And remember, I got this code from right here on our example. All right, and then here is the footer, and save it. And now my thing is clicked back to the way it is. Okay, so now I'm using grid, and now I've got grid defining what this stuff, how this thing lays out. Grid's not particularly responsive. I mean, this thing is doing this because of Flexbox. The grid's not really helping me out in terms of the responsivity of it. It is a great way to lay out your website, and it can be extremely efficient in doing that. Okay, so what I want to do in the different areas is, now what has happened is that I have the body of the document, which is the grid container. So here, this is displayed as grid, the body displayed as grid. That makes anything that is a child of the body a grid child, a grid, what is the thing called? A grid element? Grid item, okay? So, so that's a grid item now. And so these things, the header, the main, and the footer are now grid items, and I can apply styling and formatting to those things based on that stuff. So display grid, but then I can come into the main, come back over here, and how do I want to format the things? And so if I scroll down on this document, I can see the item justify. How do I want to format this stuff? So this is a simple one, right? I'm justify self-center. So what I'm saying is that I'm justifying the item itself as a center. Here's my main. I'm going to drop this in here. Now I had already done this with main. So here I justify content center in flex. All right. So now I got two things doing that, not necessary. So I'm going to take that out. But in the header, I'll use grid to center the items. Oh, come on. All right, there we go. So save that, come back. And now my navigation is centered. All right, so if I take this out again, command /, save that. Now this is not centered. And so this is the thing that's centering. So I'm using grid to center this item. Okay. And there's lots of other things. I can use the grid to align the items. I can create a gap between the grid items with grid. I can justify to the right or the left or the thing, or justify stretch. These, which might be, that might be something that I would do to kind of solve my other issues that are there. So if you notice, this looks a lot like a table. And as I said in an earlier talk, tables were awesome. They were so great. They weren't responsive at all, but they really were wonderful for laying out web pages because you had columns and rows and you could make that stuff look good. Alas, in, whatever it was, 1999, table layout went away and my world got dark for a long time. Until I found grid. Okay, so here we are back at our thing, and then here this thing is doing this. This isn't perfect, I think justify. We could align the items as well, and that might go into the UL. There's lots of other stuff that I could do in here to make this look better than it is. Right, the exercise is not like a design exercise. We're kind of just trying to do some code. Okay, so and just do a little bit of flex and grid. So that would suffice for that portion of the assignment. That's an A. That's what I'm looking for. That's the objective. So the one more objective that we have, if we go back to our assignment, is to deal with media queries. And so here in our resource for media queries, W3 schools, I'm just going to take this business and just copy it and then come back. For any of these resources, again, I encourage you to read it and to just come through and kind of go through the whole little tutorial, and it'll show you, it'll give you a once over on whatever technology is there. Okay, take the 10 minutes, do yourself a favor. Okay. So there's that. Here's our thing. So we've got our media queries. For media queries, again, you can pretty much put it anywhere and it's still going to work. Oh, I'm noticing that I've got a little issue here where I want this stuff to come out like that. Consistency is really important with this stuff, right? So like this little space, I don't want that in there. This space in here, that's 2 lines. Ouch. I don't want that in there either. All right, and then the space in here. Yep, that's a little bit better. I could get a little bit, so like these things, I kind of like it to be like that, so I know where those things end. And then also if I have something in the body or if I have something in the main, here's another little spot to clean up this business right here. I could take that out and then put this in here. Right, so I'm defining that area, but I don't need to define it more than once. And then, of course, we want to take out any stuff that's in here that's there. Is there a header? No, but there is a footer. So I'm going to grab this stuff, copy it, delete that out, do this. And the advantage, of course, is that I don't have several places to look for to get to that content. And then, of course, I probably, if I were being, really organized, I would put that body stuff first. And that gives me just the stuff where I want it. Okay.